Hello, shamanettes, and welcome to the Beauty Shaman. So today we are talking about melasma. A question that many of you have is, what do I do about those brown spots? So today we are going to hear it from the horse's mouth from Ben Fuchs, who is a pharmacist, a nutritionist, cosmetic chemist, and creator of Truth Treatments Skincare, my very favorite skincare. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ben.
Greetings, Suzanne. I am proud and honored to be a shamanette.
You are my honorary shamanette.
I'm honored to be a
Absolutely.
shamanette. Thank you.
Okay, so age spots, brown spots. So, I'm
Yes.
on the computer and they know I'm in this industry. I get pop-ups, left, right, and center, cure your brown spots, just
Oh,
do
yeah.
this, or, it's all these promises, these,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. I've been in the industry long enough to know the majority of it is kind of baloney. So let's
Yes.
talk about, why is it baloney? What are we looking for here?
Here's the deal.
Yeah.
The pigmentation, let
Yeah.
me back up a second. The stress response in the body manifests as multiple symptoms. When the stress response is triggered, lots of different things happen. So when
Right.
you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, that's the iconic stress from an evolutionary perspective. These days, it's credit card bills and our jobs and our taxes and our dysfunctional families, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah.
From an evolutionary perspective, the stress response is the iconic representative of the stress response is what happens after you run from a tiger. Because the basic stresses from an evolutionary perspective were starvation and wild animals, or
Right.
killing you. So when the stress response is triggered, lots of different things happen. The digestive system will slow down or even stop because you're not supposed to eat lunch when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger. Your immune system will become suppressed because immunity doesn't matter when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger. Your fertility will decrease because you're not supposed to make a baby when you're running from a saber-toothed tiger, etc. Lots of things, different things happen as part of the systemic stress response. The entire system is involved. Well, guess what? One of the major signs of the stress response, of an activated stress response, is pigmentation, because another iconic stress is the sun. So under conditions of duress or under conditions of hormonal secretions associated with duress, we will pigment. And we will pigment inappropriately. The hormones that trigger the pigments will not pigment in an even tan. They'll pigment in different spots in a splotchy formation. So pigmentation is a sign of bodily duress, perhaps even psychological duress, but the hormonal response to duress. That's the most important thing to understand. It is not a skin issue, and it's not the sun issue. It's not a sun issue. So you can wear your sunscreens, that's great, but as soon as your body is manifesting the hormones of stress, you're going to pigment, sunscreen or not. You're going to hyperpigment,
I
sunscreen
actually
or not.
didn't know that. I didn't know that wearing sunscreen, it wouldn't matter. That's interesting.
Doesn't matter. It's because the
Wow.
hormones are coming from the inside.
Right.
The hormonal manifestation or the hormonal stimulus of pigmentation is from the inside out, not from the
Right.
outside in. It doesn't matter about the sun. The sun may be another stressor, and
Right.
yes, the sun can do it, but without having the hormonal imbalances, you're not going to hyperpigment. When you're out in the sun and you're a child, you don't hyperpigment. You're out in the sun all day long. Do you ever hyperpigment when you're a child? Do you ever see a baby with hyperpigmentation?
Right.
You're out in the sun. It's a sign of the sun may trigger, but your hormones have to be out of balance. And there's a couple key hormones that are involved. First of all, the most important hormone is the hormone of stress, which is cortisol. Cortisol is
Right.
a pigmenting agent. And so number one, stress hormone, cortisol. There's a couple things, when you have cortisol, there's a couple things you could do. I'll tell you about that in a second. Number two, and all women or most women know this, and that's estrogen.
Right.
And you have a phenomena where people will get hyperpigmentation when they're on the birth control pill, which is estrogen, or when they're on hormone replacement therapy, estrogen replacement therapy, they'll hyperpigment. There's the mask of pregnancy. You may have heard of that. That's
Yeah.
where you hyperpigment. PCOS, which is an estrogenic condition partially, also will cause hyperpigmentation. Post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation, by the way, is related to all of this. If you find that you're pigmenting after you have an inflammatory reaction, that's also associated with either the stress response, cortisol or estrogen. Also, the barrier, the skin barrier, a weakened skin barrier will make you more predisposed to hyperpigmentation. And those are the three main elements. Number one, cortisol. Number two, estrogen. And number three, a weakened skin barrier. Now, a weakened skin barrier itself can be caused by something called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Sometimes people call it dysbiosis, meaning messed up gut bacteria. Dysbiosis, interestingly, can also throw off your estrogen because you have bacteria in the intestine that are supposed to process estrogen. They're estrogen detoxifiers. And so when you're dealing with bacterial conditions or dysbiosis conditions, that can throw off the estrobolome. Have you heard that term, the estrobolome?
I have not. That's a good word.
Yeah, isn't that a cool word? The estrobolome, 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 is a complex of bacteria that are supposed to deactivate estrogen. Estrogen is a very toxic hormone. It's active in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. It's secreted in tiny, tiny, tiny amounts and has to be detoxified very quickly. If for whatever reason you're not detoxifying your estrogen, if you have dysbiosis and it's affecting the estrobolome, if you have bile issues or a gallbladder issue because estrogen is cleared out in bile, that can cause estrogen to accumulate and make you more at risk for sensitivity or for pigmentation. Right. And then also get liver issues because the liver is where estrogen is detoxified largely. So we have liver issues, fatty liver disease, or some kind of liver condition that can also compromise estrogen detoxification. You see, I didn't even mention the skin here. Yeah. We're talking about cortisol, we're talking about estrogen, we're talking about the barrier, we're talking about the intestine, we're talking about the gallbladder, and we're talking about the liver. And those are the areas that you want to focus on in addition to psychological relaxation strategies.
So let me ask you, I love what you're saying. This is super interesting. And one of the points I want to make is I looked up kind of what does the sort of medical community say about this curing, and what they're saying is hydroquinone, tretinoin, and a monocle topical steroid. So they're going topical. So let's relate this to what you're saying.
Yeah, let me address that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we isolated the problem to cortisol stress, estrogen, the estrobolome, the liver, the gallbladder, the skin barrier, and balancing estrogen, et cetera. So let's talk about things you can do, and that will take care of what you just said, because there are some things that you can do topically, and I want to address that. But the idea, even more importantly, if I could digress real quickly, the fact that when you get online or you read what the medical community says, the medical community, when you're talking about the medical community, you're talking about mostly dermatologists, but maybe OBGYNs and internal people as well. It's like the medical community has a certain set of tools they work with.
Right.
You know, if you go to a mechanic, he's going to use a wrench, right? Or a screwdriver. If you go to a carpenter, he's going to use a hammer. If you go to a carpenter to fix your engine, he's going to try to fix your engine with a hammer. Right. That's not going to help you. So if we go to the medical community for this condition, they're going to use the tools they have at their disposal. The tools they have at their disposal is, as you mentioned, hydroquinone and retinoic acid. And now they have some internal things like tranexamic acid, et cetera, that they can use. But they're not going to think of going to the intestine. And it's a rare, although they may, but it's rare, a rare physician is going to think to work with estrogen or with cortisol, because that's not their job. That's our job if we're interested in eliminating the problem permanently. They're interested in, and I'm not knocking on, this is not a knock on them, this is their job. Their job is to take care of the symptom. And that's where topical strategies come in. And there are some symptomatic strategies that you can use to get rid of the symptom. That's not going to address the cause, and your melasma is going to come back. Right. Okay, so hydroquinone topically is the go-to for lightening the skin. It's extremely toxic, and you can only get it over the with a prescription in a 4% strength. But if you want a stronger one, you have a compounding pharmacist like myself make an 8% or even a 10% or even a 20%. And I made 20% hydroquinone. But it's super toxic. You can't use it for more than 3 months, or else you'll cause permanent disabling of your pigment cells and get white spots. It's carcinogenic. It's a very toxic, nasty substance. There are peels that you could do that don't have hydroquinone in them, but they have resorcinol in them. I don't know if you've heard of resorcinol. Resorcinol is part of the Jesner's peel. And the Jesner's peel is made up of lactic acid, salicylic acid, and resorcinol. Resorcinol is like a souped up version of hydroquinone and has toxicity like hydroquinone has toxicity. Resorcinol also has toxicity. There's a form of resorcinol now that's a little bit less toxic called hydroxyresorcinol, and you can use that. So peels, hydroquinone, those are the topical go-tos. Personally, I like retinol. Retinoic acid and retinol are both skin lighteners. I like retinol because in addition to skin lightening, and it's just as potent as hydroquinone, but it doesn't have the toxicity that hydroquinone has. It's just as effective, I should say, as hydroquinone without the toxicity. In fact, instead of toxicity, when you use retinol to lighten the skin, you'll get anti-aging benefits. and you'll get skin sloughing benefits, exfoliation benefits. So you get smoothing and softening the skin. So if you want to go topical, retinoic acid or retinoic acid, if you want a prescription, is just as strong as hydroquinone, but it doesn't have the toxicity of hydroquinone. There's also a prescription that they'll make sometimes called Kligman's formula. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And Kligman's formula is the go-to compounding solution for skin lightening. It's made up of three elements: retinoic acid, which is the drug version of retinol, hydrocortisone, which keeps the inflammation down, or sometimes they'll use something called triamcinolone to keep the inflammation down. And the third element in Kligman's solution, retinoic acid, is hydroquinone, retinoic acid, and hydrocortisone or triamcinolone to keep the inflammation down. It doesn't work very well. It breaks that, the cream doesn't really hold up. It's not a very nice strategy. Alpha hydroxy acids can work if you want to be patient and lighten the skin using toners or even peels if you want to go to the esthetician. But all of these are short-term strategies, because as long as you have your cortisol, your cortisol issues, your barrier issues, your estrogen issues, you're going to have problems with hyperpigmentation. So it'll come back. So in the short run, these topical skin lighteners can have some benefits. Now these days there's about 100, maybe 1,000, I don't even know how many topical skin lighteners, because it turns out, this is very interesting, in nature, melanin, the pigment melanin, is found abundantly in nature. So melanin is produced via an enzyme. It comes from melanin is converted from an amino acid called tyrosine. Tyrosine is a building block amino acid for a lot of the stress hormones, and so it's part of the same chemistry as the stress hormones. And tyrosine is converted to melanin by an enzyme called tyrosinase. And so now you have all these tyrosinase inhibitors that are used. And there's lots of different ones. Hydroquinone is a tyrosinase inhibitor, and that gets all the press. Kojic acid is a tyrosinase inhibitor. Licorice has some tyrosinase inhibitor effects. And inhibiting tyrosinase to keep the body from making melanin is a strategy, but as long as the body wants to pigment, it's going to pigment. They're very ineffective, notoriously ineffective.
So interesting. I'm glad you said that. That was one of my questions, is can you actually prevent the pigment? Because that's what they claim. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. That's interesting.
Not true. Pigmentation's built in. Look, the body doesn't care that you have spots. The body cares. It wants to save you from a jam. So you're not going to shut down the stress response, which is hardwired into the chemistry from millions of years of evolution, with a tyrosinase inhibitor. That's not going to happen. You may, slow down things a little bit, but it's really not an effective strategy. I should also tell you, vitamin C is also a topical skin lightener. Vitamin C is also a major anti-stress vitamin. So using vitamin C internally can help the body stress. Everybody knows probably, or most people know about vitamin C for the immune system, but really vitamin C, there's more vitamin C in your adrenal glands than there is anywhere else in the body. And that's because vitamin C is very intimately involved in the stress response. So in modifying the stress response. So oral vitamin C can help, and then topical vitamin C has some skin lightening effects. The best strategies, the best way to control melasma is a three-part strategy. Number one, relax, lighten up, lower your stress hormones, cortisol, just by meditation, slow, deep breathing, psychological, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychological strategies, etc. Then you want to strengthen your skin barrier, and there's a couple ways to do that. Number one, because of the relationship between dysbiosis and the skin barrier, making sure your digestive system is operating efficiently. You're not bloating, you don't have gas, you don't have any intestinal problems, etc. And there's all kinds of digestive health supplements that you could use, from apple cider vinegar to digestive enzymes to probiotics with your meals to hyperimmune egg, which is an interesting way to control SIBO and dysbiosis. Whole bunch of digestive strategies. And then third of all, and this is really interesting, keeping your blood sugar stable.
Yes.
Keeping your blood sugar stable for a couple of reasons. First of all, insulin and blood sugar are associated with hyperpigmentation, but also when your blood sugar goes up and goes down, first of all, when it goes up, it'll go back down again. The body will pull the sugar out of your blood. When your blood sugar rises, that is, the concentration of sugar in the blood goes up, the body has a mechanism for yanking that sugar out, because sugar is very explosive stuff. That lowering of the blood sugar will cause cortisol to go up. And we all know that if your blood sugar drops, you go to a condition called hypoglycemia.
Yes.
And one of the signs of hypoglycemia is jitteriness. And that's because when you're in a hypoglycemic state, the body will secrete cortisol as an emergency. Cortisol will in addition to giving you some emergency energy, coffee energy, I call it, jittery energy, it will also pigment the skin. So keeping your blood sugar stable so you can keep your cortisol stable is also important. So those are the main strategies: psychological relaxation, digestive support, using blood sugar supplements, blood sugar stabilizing supplements and stabilizing your blood sugar. And then also keeping the barrier strong. And there's a lot of ways to do that. First of all,
talk about that. That's
yeah,
interesting because you brought that up earlier as being a real issue, having a
it's a
weak
main
barrier.
issue.
So let's talk
big,
about that.
yes,
Yeah.
it's the biggest problem with skin as we get older is a weakened barrier. When you have a weakened barrier, you will have more sensitive skin. You will be more likely to hyperpigment, and you'll be more susceptible to immune issues on the skin. In fact, immune issues from inside can also cause barrier issues. So strengthening the skin barrier is important. Digestive support will strengthen the skin barrier. That's a must for strengthening the skin barrier. But there's also supplements that you can use to strengthen the skin barrier. Essential fatty acids are a must-have for strengthening the skin barrier. Phospholipids, that's a type of molecule that has phosphorus and a lipid associated with it. The most common is lecithin. The most common source of phospholipids is lecithin. You can find phospholipids in organ meats and in cheese and in eggs. Those are the best sources of grains. Those are the best sources of internal phospholipids. And then niacin is also a barrier strengthening supplement. And you can use niacin topically to strengthen the barrier, as well as taking it internally. And then also, and this is kind of tricky to strengthen the barrier, you can use things like alpha hydroxy acids and peels, as well as retinoic acid and retinol to strengthen the barrier. But it's a catch-22, because if the barrier is weak, you're going to find it hard to use alpha hydroxy acids or get peels or use retinol or retinoic acid. So you kind of have to start yourself up slowly and work yourself up with low doses or low concentrations of alpha hydroxy acids or retinol, and then apply infrequently, like maybe once or twice a month, then maybe go up to 3 times a month, then maybe once a week, and then gradually increase yourself to where you're able to use alpha hydroxy acids and retinol once or twice a week. Most people aren't going to take that long to get their a strong enough barrier that they can actually use barrier strengthening topicals. Does that make sense? You got to start slowly, because if you try to use barrier strengthening supplements with a weak barrier, you can cause problems, including hyperpigmentation. So you got to kind of work yourself into it slowly.
Right. And I think this is, I did a coaching session today with a woman who's just coming out of chemo. And we talked about this because she was like, I really want to have better skin. I'm like, okay, but you got to take it slowly because you're so oversensitized at this point from like your gut's been just, the gut flora has been destroyed. We have to go at it slowly. And so we were talking about pecking away at it and what that looks like. And it is a little bit more time consuming, but I think the end result is your skin is great, but you really have to take the time. So I appreciate you bringing up that point. I think that's really relevant.
That's really good, because you're working with patients, and I'm sure you hear, oh, I want to get rid of this right away. I want to go to the strongest peel I can get. Just peel the hell out of this stuff and get rid of it. It doesn't work that way. Slow and steady wins the race.
Absolutely.
That's why estheticians are so important, is because you're like guiding the patient through the entire process. Not just physically helping them with their peels and their topical products, but even just psychologically, like a coach, to try to guide them through that. And a good esthetician, as I'm sure you know, is as much a personal trainer, a personal coach, as they are strictly a skincare therapist.
That's what I do.
Good for you.
But I love all the information you just gave, way more technical than I know. So I really appreciate that. And ladies, if you have any questions now that we've talked about this, please write down below. I think this is a super important subject, and we are going to do another interview on sensitivity, sensitive skin, which also feeds into this exact same subject. So be sure to stay tuned for that, or look for that on the Beauty Shaman on my channel on YouTube, because we're going to have that as well, and also on the Truth Treatments channel. So thank you so much, Ben, for sharing with us today. And thank you so much, ladies, for watching The Beauty Shaman.